All right. This is SITREP VH. We are still here at the dialogue on ASEAN Maritime Security here at Pasay City. And with us is Dean Jemy Gatdula of the University of Asia and the Pacific Law School. So, Professor, tell us perhaps we can start by asking your initial reactions to the recent cabinet reshuffles that's underway with President Marcos. He asked his cabinet to resign, to pass their courtesy resignation. There's talks of reshuffling and people getting axed. What do you think this is a reaction to, and who do you think will get the axe, basically?
Well, for me, it's essentially a healthy exercise of governance on the part of the president. Um, it, well, clearly, the election has showed us that there is a need for certain changes or adjustments to be made, and you could see it in the way that our citizens voted for, particularly with regard to the Senate. So it's not. I wouldn't classify it, and definitely I wouldn't. I would contradict those who would say it's a sign of weakness on the part of the president, but rather a healthy response to what I believe his ability to be in touch with the pulse of what the citizens are needing. And so to have a call for the mass resignations is essentially uh, a normal move for him to have the flexibility to be able to make the necessary adjustments. It's not um, automatically something to say that just because a change has been made to a particular department or not indicates a lack or an incompetence on the part of that particular official, whoever that may be, that will be replaced. But more or less a fine tuning on whether or not the officials that will be in line will or that will be coming in will be more in line with the speed, with the overall vision and the overall theme that the government wants to be able to project. So this is something that I think most healthy democracies do. You could actually see it in the UK, and I believe even the president's father did multiple government changes, particularly from during the midterm elections and so on, in the 60s and even in the late 70s, in the early 70s as well. So this is something that I think is overall a good development for us. So it shows a lively and a healthy response to the recent elections.
All right, Prof. Jamai, perhaps you can tell our listeners what you're doing here over at the dialogue on ASEAN maritime security. What's the importance of you, a distinguished law professor and dean, being here in a ostensibly security and geopolitical summit?
Well, obviously, I'm here also to learn from the various experts who are really more knowledgeable about me on the subject. But as a citizen and also as an academic, um, I'm here also to be able to pitch in my 2 cents worth, which I believe is really more in the protection of the sovereignty of the Philippines. Um, that definitely there will be some positions that will be taken that some of our officials and perhaps our partners or our friends from other countries will be in good faith believing that this will be to the best. But of course, obviously, not everybody is infallible. So hopefully, we can serve as a counterpoint and look at this as a check on their position so that we can move forward in the best possible way.
We had the State Council of the Philippines, Attorney Ganchon, earlier discussing the need for the Philippines to constantly assert its maritime claims through international law. Perhaps you can comment on what is international law, because you had many specifically the international rules-based order, because you had many discussions earlier on. I mean, who sets the international rules-based order, and it's becoming increasingly how can we say wishful thinking to use it as a slogan in a more in a more dangerous and uncertain geopolitical times. So what role does the international rules place order still play in our assertion of our sovereignty, as you mentioned?
Well, Freddie, actually, I'm quite in line with what Freddie Ganchun said. That she's essentially a faculty. You see, she's a public international law professor of ours at the University of Asia and the Pacific. And what she said is actually correct, that we have to be able to move forward in accordance with international law. Your question is, what is international law? Well, this is essentially a law that's governing nations between them. There's a specific category of measures needed in order for something to be considered as international law. Obviously, you have the treaties, customs, general principles of law. that we have recognized through time, that would be essentially binding on us in an objective and universal way. Unfortunately, there are some countries who would tend to bend the interpretation
Yes.
of international law so much to the point of actually sometimes already breaking international law. I could understand some countries wanting to be able to interpret international law so as to serve national interests. Obviously, that's something that the Philippines should also be doing. But there's a difference between bending the law and breaking the law. And so I have to say outright, for example, that China has oftentimes not being uh, has not been overly um, consistent in applying international law in the way all of us in the international community would like it to be. So, so as far as we are concerned, we know that the Philippines is in compliance with international law. Our constitution looks at international law as part of the laws of the land, and so therefore, we know that our actions would be completely in line with what international law says. The question is to be able to have, but in the end, like law, like any other thing, is always there's a need to be backed up by a certain amount of pressure. And that's a reality that we need to acknowledge, whether it be the domestic scene or whether it be the international scene. Law would always need to have a certain amount of coercive ability to be able to enforce compliance from those which are states that we consider as recalcitrant. And in the case of international, obviously there's no international government that would serve that purpose. Instead, what we have are alliances of states, and hopefully the Philippines will be able to accumulate enough like-minded states that truly believe in the international legal system, and that we could persuade eventually China to act in a more appropriate and proper manner.
I asked my question on what is international law because apparently, from what we're seeing from this conference and also from rhetoric that's now on social media, there's this perception among many of our partners that or some of our ASEAN partners will say, well, when you say the international rules-based order, there's a very definition of what that is, and the Chinese and their propagandists online would say that that definition, you see, as stated by Manila, seems to be set by the West or set by Washington or set by whatever that interests us. What would you perhaps you can comment on this variety in what is international law in the interpretations in ASEAN, even in our region?
No, that's not necessarily correct. International law is essentially based on a couple of. There's a certain foundational basis that international law has, and while I do not want to get into a very academic discussion of it, a lot of what international law is actually based on natural law. A
Yes.
lot of it is also based on consent. That's why we call it positive law. So you have treaty law, general principles of law, customary law. But a lot of those laws would also be considered as valid because they're in line with natural law. Now, for China to be able to say that a lot of it is essentially developed by the West is not accurate, because it itself is part of the United Nations. It itself has joined the UNCLOS, and all of these legal frameworks, which it voluntarily joined, are all rooted in a uniform legal philosophy, and that includes the natural law. Now, needless, what I'm trying to say is that for China to actually acquiesce and join a legal framework, and
Yes.
then later on step aside and say that, well, that legal framework is skewed, is essentially like joining a league, and then when the games do not go your way, then you're going to start claiming that the games are rigged. That is obviously that is self-serving, and and, uh, and obviously not true. So
And lastly, when it comes to geopolitical issues, Professor, what are the next legal avenues that the Philippines can take with regards to our claims in the South China Sea? Have we exhausted it now, or is there still more legal avenues to take, or is this just the rule? Is it just the position, the role of ships and tanks at this point?
no, hopefully the thing that we should do is that it doesn't reach that point, that it becomes a matter of ships and tanks. There are talks, or there are studies being made whether or not we should file additional cases, to one, to protect our environmental rights, number two, to protect our sovereign rights in the appropriate international tribunals. There are also additional ways wherein suggestions are being made to make adjustments with regard to certain guidelines, codes of conduct that will take into account the gray zone tactics that the Chinese are opt to be using. But ultimately, in the end, I think, and this is something that I believe, I probably depart from many of our countrymen who are into this subject, and that is, I think we have to make a firm stand
Yes.
and automatic and already loudly declare that as far as the Chinese are concerned, they have already essentially breached the line between a mere defense of their own possible interests and that have actually already transgressed and are now and have acted repeatedly already committed acts of aggression against the Philippines. I am not here calling for obviously for anything that will be inappropriate or how should I put it, imprudent as far as the Philippines is concerned. But we have to be able to call a spade, and that is the Chinese had already committed acts of aggression, and that they already are in violation of international law, and that it is already in the ball of China to be able to make the adjustments in regard to its conduct. The Philippines has done everything correct as far as our response to the Chinese are. And even though the Chinese had already breached our rights, we have still been very reasonable. I do not think it is to our interest to overlook that fact that the Chinese have already committed certain acts that could be considered as aggression, and that we are still essentially trying to adjust to their actions. Actually, the truth of the matter is that they kumbaga, in so many words, they've already had debts to pay,
Yes.
and right now we're in a position to actually collect those debts. Now, whether or not the Chinese are willing to go into more unreasonable lengths in order to keep on being a debtor is a different thing, and hopefully they correct themselves and act in an appropriate and civil manner.
And my last set of questions will be more still China related, but related to constitutionality here in the Philippines. There's now increasing concern about the influence of China in our local politics, especially when it comes to local influencers and state-sponsored propaganda against the Philippine government. And naturally, there's conversations taking place now in Congress on amending our espionage and treason laws. I and you have talked about this before on social media about how you would feel that our current laws are inefficient to cover peacetime treason or the
Oh
fact.
no, actually, I've thought of our
Yeah.
current laws, particularly with regard to espionage, as sufficient to be able to held into account those individuals that are acting as doing espionage in the
Yes.
Philippines. Okay, fine, we could update them, but that is not to say that just because we can update them does not mean that the tools that we have with regard to espionage is not already sufficient.
What are the tools that we have with regards to state-sponsored funding of social media influencers in this country?
Oh wait, before that, so we have. I think that with regard to espionage, the tools that we have are already there. There is a need to update our treason law so
Yes.
that it could be applicable and be made to apply during peacetime. There are other things that we need to be able to enforce, but I think even then, the laws that we have right now are enough. It's a matter na lang, I think, of political will,
Enforcement.
and that is the fact that we have to understand that as far as our ability to protect our national security is concerned, it is there, and our government is fully mandated, whether by their oaths of office or whether by the terms of the Constitution. It is there that our government officials should protect our national security. The question is that people are thinking that, well, okay, fine, but there are civil liberties that we have to take
Yes,
into
exactly.
consideration of. But our civil liberties are not designed to keep us in a state of suicide. Our civil liberties have an inherent built-in proviso that if you look at the history of our civil liberties provisions, whether it be the right to speech, right to freedom of assembly, and so on, and you look at their historical context, their philosophical context, there's an inbuilt caveat that it is not to apply if what we're talking of here is national survival. And so that's I think one thing that we have to be able to consider. We should be confident enough to realize that even though yes, we do have our Bill of Rights, those Bill of Rights will also be in a way held in abeyance if it comes to already national survival. Now, the other thing that I would like to point out is this: is that I think with regard to international law, there's also an opening for the Philippines to be able to apply some sort of reciprocity, and this is something I've been suggesting, so that if you have a foreigner here and would do something in relation to national security, then I think we should be able to apply the same laws that they would be applying in their country.
Yes.
So if, for example, you have a foreigner A coming from a country whose design of civil liberties is a little bit more looser when it comes to national security, then I think we should have the ability to apply those same looseness in relation to that foreigner.
And this would be under constitutional norms.
And that, I believe, should be because, again, yes. The short answer is yes. And the reason is because of the fact that I don't think we should be. The Constitution does not require us to be suicidal.
Yes.
We should follow and we should respect civil liberties, but not at the expense of national survival. Now, at the same time, we should not allow our own respect for human dignity, human rights, to be abused by those peoples that have no respect for human rights and human dignity. It's putting at a bind that what we don't deserve to do so.
Yes. Dean Jemy Gatdula of the University of Asia and the Pacific Law. Thank you so much for being with us at SITREP PH.
Okay, thank you very much.